I am very pleased to see that I'm joined by two of my colleagues, and I'm going to call on Mr. Mica from Florida, yield him whatever time he wishes to consume to talk about this very, very disastrous situation and a bill that he has that offers some solutions.
Well, thank you so
Chairman
much.
Mica.
Thank you. We affectionately refer the gentleman from Texas as Judge Carter, but distinguished member of Congress, part of the leadership of the Republican team. And thank you also for coming tonight before the Congress and the American people, the House of Representatives, to review probably what is one of the worst ecological disasters, natural disasters our country has ever experienced, and actually to come here and review some of the timeline of what has taken place. You've touched on a number of important issues. First of all, as someone who comes from the state of Florida, we're part of the Gulf Coast. I have to extend our deepest heartfelt sympathies to those that lost lives, both on the rig, and now we heard today from some of our colleagues in an extensive review that we participated on our side of the aisle from some of those from the adjoining states, how their economy is suffering, and how the proposed moratorium that's being arbitrarily imposed may make this disaster even worse. It's hard to imagine it being worse, but again, we empathize with those who've lost life, who've been injured, and now have seen their livelihood dramatically impaired by this natural disaster. What we've got to do, though, is we've got to step back. We've got to look at what took place, and then we've got to look at some remedial action. Judge Carter, gentleman from Texas, raised some excellent points. This is now 60 days, almost 2 full months into this disaster since it took place on April 20th. We have not had the proper response. That's evident. The gentleman talked about the need to bring skimmers and other craft in. He spoke about waiving the Jones Act, which President Bush did, I think, in 4 days afterwards. We haven't really called for a waiving of the Jones Act, but we would support it. It probably should have been done. There have been offers of foreign vessels. I was absolutely dumbfounded. On Saturday, I received an urgent email from those who are involved in with American flag vessels, one of the leading maritime and ship owners, domestically flagged, U.S. flag, who contacted me on Saturday. The message just floored me. Mr. Mica, our industry, the American flagged industry, doesn't mind waiving the Jones Act. The Jones Act does protect American jobs and American labor. Again, it's great to have those flagged vessels. Waiving it is done on rare occasions and emergencies, as President Bush did. But I was informed that we have flagged Jones Act compliant vessels, American flag vessels, waiting. This particular company, one of the largest maritime companies in the United States, American flag, has been waiting for a call. They've been waiting for a call from the Department of Homeland Security, from the Coast Guard, any federal agency or BP to come in and provide. They have vessels that can help and could be helping in the cleanup even before we exempted foreign vessels to come in on this, and we've had an offer of that for some time. So I was shocked. I sent to Secretary Napolitano yesterday a letter, and I outlined what the information I got. I lead the Transportation Committee in the House on the Republican side. But I said, Madam Secretary, this is unbelievable. that no one has even availed themselves to the American flag vessels who are ready, who have equipment. We should not be endangered in Florida or in other states in having that oil up on our shores. We have the capability that has not even been utilized to date. So this was my letter, my plea to the Secretary, and I'm shocked and disappointed. The other thing, too, is there seems to be a conflict. Last night we heard the President say that we have been in charge. He's in charge as the Commander-in-Chief under the Oil Spill Recovery Act that we passed in 1990 after Exxon Valdez. It's pretty clear the chain of command. But Thad Allen, who is in charge of this, former Coast Guard Commandant, now in charge of the spill cleanup, he said, but we do not have the capability. The United States government does not have the capability. He said that over and over again, that the private sector has this capability. Here, again, we have U.S. flag vessels that can do the cleanup, haven't gotten a call, still waiting. The Jones Act, they could have waived and allowed those who volunteered assistance with skimmers and other equipment that has not come in. So while there are folks in this administration who say they're in charge, there's some disconnect here in getting the equipment, getting the resources out there. In fact, the private sector has been in charge, and this is the first time the President has met with these folks. I was dumbfounded, too, today, and I think Judge Carter was in that meeting and other members on our side of the aisle, when we heard the Gulf Coast delegation say they have requested but not yet met with the President of the United States. It's hard to believe the President would not meet with the elected representatives of the Gulf Coast states to sit down. And then time and again we heard in the review that took place today of requests, simple requests for berms to stop the oil coming into the marshes, simple requests to act now before or sooner rather than later, and we've seen the results of now that oil's making its way towards the Florida shores and doing even more damage. So if, in fact, the President is in charge, we need to free these vessels, employ every means possible to keep this disaster from going further. One other thing I disagree with in the President, now I know it's important to act, and he did act in imposing a moratorium, but I think what they've got to do, and I believe he revised that moratorium to not affect the 3,500 shallow water drilling sites, but it is closing down the deep water drilling sites. And some of those are exploration sites, and in fact they probably should be closed until we have assurances that future deep water drilling can be done. My point here is that by closing all of them down with a blanket moratorium, we are putting more people out of work, taking a horrible situation and making it worse. We will have even more people unemployed. So I think the logical, reasonable approach would be to send inspectors in, hire or retain whatever we need, or if we have government officials to go in and see that the deep water drilling that is taking place where they actually have the well in production, which I think is about half of the approximately 30 deep water wells that are out there. We don't want to make this situation worse economically for those that have lost their job, seeing their business closed down, or again see thousands of people put out of work by the wrong approach. So a reasonable approach. First, We get every piece of equipment, whether it's U.S. or foreign flagged, there. Let's get this. This can be cleaned up. This is a doable job with both U.S. vessels that have been waiting to hear that call from the administration. And then secondly, let's also be reasonable in the moratorium. I have been a strong advocate of keeping the U.S. independent and free as much as we could, drill where it's safe. My state of Florida, I helped on a 100-mile set-off years and years ago. I thought that was reasonable. But you know, it always may or may not make a difference, because this was only 45 miles off the coast of Louisiana, as we've seen. The other thing we need to do is have a good backup system. We shouldn't be rubber stamping approvals that any company, whether it's BP or anyone else. BP in February of 2009 gave this, and this is a copy of it. This is the plan for their exploring that site, and they're doing an exploration well, a development well. This plan was submitted in March of 2009, over a year ago. And this is the one-page approval. I got a copy of this before our Transportation Committee hearing subject, just before it took place. This is the one-page carte blanche approval. I don't think some of the people in the Minerals Management Service even read this 59-page request, and we've heard hearings lately as to the failures of BP to outline a good, solid proposal. This proposal is the basic plan for drilling that BP submitted, and it also refers to a much bigger document, and that's the actual 500-plus page document that details all of the spill cleanup procedures that BP would employ. That was also rubber stamped with this approval, this one-page approval. So this was done by the Obama administration with people sleeping at the switch or not paying attention. What's shocking, and I heard former Governor Palin tell the country this, and people should listen to Governor Palin on this. Sarah Palin, when she was the governor, she was tough on the oil companies. No one passed anything by her. She cracked down on them, made sure they towed the line. And what was interesting is Governor Palin told what they did is, she said that this never would have happened, this kind of approval in her state, because there would have been more scrutiny. The plan that BP offered, in addition to this 59-page, the 500 cleanup plan, it looks like BP merely mirrored the Alaska plan. In fact, it told how they were going to deal with cleaning up Walter's seal and polar bears, none of which I've seen in the Gulf of Mexico. So again, the Minerals Management Service was asleep at the switch. What's finally startling is two things. Is one, I had our Transportation Infrastructure Committee get a copy of the President's budget. This is the Obama budget, not doctored anything. I have the exact pages and cover copied of the budget. And in February of this year, before this oil spill, the President submitted a budget to our T&I Committee, Transportation and Infrastructure, that oversees the Coast Guard, to slash the Coast Guard, our first responders, by 1,100 positions. In addition, he wanted to decommission and take out of service ships, helicopters, aircraft, all which are necessary for our first response. I remember when Frank Lubiando, who's my ranking member on the Coast Guard Committee within our Transportation Committee, when we heard about this, we sent out this press release. This is in February, after the President had recommended cutting our first responders. We said it's outrageous, but we said this is a recipe for disaster. And this is dated February 25th, after we got this. Then startling in this also, if you look a little bit further in the budget, not under our purview, but our staff found this, that the minerals management service that the President talked about last night and how we need to clean that up and everything, in his budget that he proposed to Congress, he proposed slashing the environmental review agency within that, or activities within that agency and bureau, by $2 million. A pretty dramatic cut for someone who has to review, again, what the private sector submits, their plan, slashing that plan. I thought this was just unbelievable. And finally, this is in February. In March, the President came out, and this is the story in the New York Times, and said that we have to increase drilling in the Gulf. This is it. This didn't make it up. It's the New York Times. Obama opened offshore areas to oil drilling, and it says right here, the Gulf. So first he's slashing first responders. Then he's next proposing slashing the agency that does the environmental reviews. The review, again, the oil companies present that to the Mineral Management Service. They review it. I showed you the rubber stamp April 6th that they approved it. And then finally, again, the main thing now is cleaning this mess up. And we've got to employ everyone we can, every piece of equipment, be it domestic or foreign, keep that from coming in. This is a doable job. When governors ask to take steps, it doesn't need, the solution doesn't need to be caught up for weeks in approvals and agencies. It shouldn't be why we can't do something. It should be, how can we get this accomplished? We've got people around the coast whose livelihood now depends on this. We can't let this disaster that's already done great damage to our economy. We have an incredible loss of life that we've seen, and again, we empathize with those who have lost loved ones in this tragedy. But we can't make a horrible tragedy even worse. So reasonableness on this approach. So I thank Judge Carter, my colleague, gentleman from Texas. I see we also have another outstanding member of our Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, Mr. Olson, also a gentleman from Texas. I thank you for coming out tonight, sharing with the Congress, the House of Representatives, and our colleagues some of the facts and information that needs to get out to the public so that we can get this mess behind us. Thank you so much, and I'll yield back.
About your Oil Spill Liability Fund Improvement Act that you've proposed.
Well, I'll tell you right
before you yield back, would you tell us a little bit about
right now? We're open to suggestions. We are looking at trying to be reasonable in whatever we do. To just impose unlimited caps on liability could be a very serious and damaging measure. First of all, let me say I believe that BP must be held accountable, fully accountable, and certainly that company has the resources. They must be responsible for the cleanup. They must also be, even though there's a limit under the current 1990 statutes of $75 million, they must be held accountable far beyond that for economic damages. What we don't want to see is that we make the terms for liability so high that only a few multinational corporations will ever be in the oil business. Small producers in Texas, throughout the Gulf, there are thousands of people in business that do a good job day in and day out. 3,500 of 3,600, I believe, active rigs in the Gulf are shallow water, but they shouldn't be penalized by the failure of government, by the failure of a big corporation. Let's hold their feet to the fire. So we're going to work with the Democrats. We're going to work with the administration. We're going to try to craft something that is fair and reasonable. holds people accountable, holds their feet to the fire. The current fund that we have should not be just a slush fund or front financing the cleanup for BP or any big company. That was actually set up for orphan spills or for a company that may not have the assets that was responsible for a spill. But we want that fund to continue to work. We may need to put more funds in it to make certain that we have coverage for the future. What we don't want to do, again, whether it's by the moratorium or by putting in insurance and liability limits that are so high that very few people can meet those requirements. So we're crafting that legislation. We want to do it in a bipartisan manner. The law does need to be altered. We should learn and we should benefit by this horrible experience and make it better and make certain that it doesn't happen again. Thank you for, again, your leadership and for asking me to participate tonight.
Before you yield back, would you tell us a little bit about, and I thank the gentleman for what he has had to say, and I want to tell you that my wife is Dutch, so I took a little offense at the fact that we had an offer of help from the Dutch of a fleet of skimmers, and it's my understanding we gave no response. Maybe that's different. I don't know. All I know is what I'm doing. I'm like Will Rogers. All I know is what I read in the newspapers. But
might I add
now I'm even more upset when I find out we have American flag ships waiting in harbor ready to help, and nobody's asked for their help. We ought to be, the leadership that runs this country, the executive branch of the government, ought to be ashamed of themselves.
Now let me, if I might, if you'd yield just a second.
I'll yield back.
In conclusion, I do want to say that I worked very closely with Mr. Oberstar, the Democrat chair of the T&I committee. When we found out that the $1.6 billion fund has a $150 million cap for emergency use, we came together last week. I offered legislation specifically to deal with that. Again, we have to act in a responsible manner for the country. We passed that. The House concurred with us. And we have provided some temporary relief. Again, I'm not going to let the $1.6 billion or the $150 million be a piggy bank for BP or any responsible parties. But we want to make certain that all the resources that are there on an emergency basis to the administration, to the Coast Guard, whoever. So no one can say it was that Congress didn't act in a timely fashion. We were alerted some of the funds were running low in that emergency portion of the 1.6, which is put out in advance. So that's, I talked a little bit before about the legislation we're looking at on liability caps, and that's what we've done in a bipartisan fashion today. We did that, and we're prepared to do even more on the caps, whatever it takes, and whatever resources and assets of the government and the private sector we can bring to bear to bring this horrible disaster under control. Thank you again for your leadership, both of our Texas members, Mr. Carter and Mr. Olson.
Reclaiming my time, let me say right off, I am very, very proud to be part of a Congress that instantly reacts to a crisis situation. You and Mr. Oberstar should be commended for that reaction. That's what we're asking from the entire government to do. Let's react positively. Let's work as a team. Let's quit blaming previous administrations. Let's go do the job to clean this mess up. I thank you very much.